The Gemara had left us off yesterday at the bottom of DAF PES with a dilemma. You have a group of 5 guys, just as an example. We discover each one of them has his own Korban Pesach, and we discover that one of them, after the fact, one of their animals had a mum, had a blemish. And we don't know which one it was. So the Gemara says that in this instance, they don't bring, that none of them have to bring a Pesach Sheni. And the Gemara says, how can you say that none of them have to bring a Pesach Sheni? We know that one of them for sure was not Yotzei Korban Pesach. The Gemara says, because it's lo efsher, there's no option. Because what are we supposed to do? If we tell all of them to bring a Korban Pesach Sheni misafek out of a doubt, well then 4 of them are going to be bringing chulin into the Azara. They're going to be bringing something that's not really a Korban into the Azara. Mm-hmm. To tell them to bring it al Tanai and say, well, either it's a Korban Pesach or it's a Korban Shlamim. So the last thing we left off with yesterday was that that's problematic, because when you bring a Korban Shlamim, what do you have to do? You have to give the chazei v'shok to the Kohen. You have to give the chest and the thigh of the animal to the Kohen. Now, if the Kohen's not part of my Korban Pesach Chabura, then he's not allowed to partake of it. And if it's a Korban Shlamim, then I'm not allowed to partake of it. So because of that dilemma, you can't even make a Tanai that it should be either a Shlamim or a Korban Pesach. Okay, so that was where we left off yesterday. Now the Gemara is going to continue arguing this point and seeing how we can come up with a solution. So the Gemara on line 2 of Daf Peites, V'neisei kol chad v'chad kohen bahadei. So the suggestion is, okay, you got 5 guys, let each one bring his Korban Pesach al Tanai, saying it's either a Shlamim or a Pesach, and then each one should bring a Kohen with him to be part of his Chabura. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, Hai Kohen Heichi Dami, what kind of Kohen, what is his status? I da'avid Pesach, dilma hai Pesachu, v'nimsa Pesach necha shalol minuyo. If he's a Kohen who was already Yotzei his Korban Pesach last month in Nisan, so then how could he be part of my Chabura? In the event that this is a Korban Pesach, I'm not allowed to feed it to him because he can't be counted as part of my Chabura because he was already Yotzei the mitzvah. And v'i d'lo avid Pesach, dilma shlamimu v'lo avid Pesach. And if this is really a Korban Shlamim, because I was also Yotzei my Korban Pesach, well then if this Kohen has not been Yotzei the Korban Pesach yet, then I'm not doing him a service, because I'm feeding him the Chazei V'Shok of a Shlamim, and it turns out that he won't be Yotzei Pesach Sheni, he won't be Yotzei his Korban Pesach. Let's say he's a Kohen that really has to bring a Pesach Sheni, and he's counting on me that this should be the Korban Pesach, and he'll take the portion. But it really isn't a Korban Pesach, so I've done him a disservice. Okay, so the Gemara now says v'nesi, and the girsa is v'nesi kulhu chamisha chad kohen delo avid Pesach v'nimni uluye ahani chamisha psachim. So the Gemara says as follows: here's a solution. Let's have the 5 guys. Each one will bring a lamb, and then we'll choose one kohen who has not yet brought his Korban Pesach. And we'll basically, each one of us will say to Joe the Kohen, hey, you're going to be part of my Chabura in the event that my Korban is the Korban Pesach. And if my Korban is not the Korban Pesach, in which case it's a Shlamim, I'm giving you the Chazei V'Shok just as the Shlamim gift. So each one will bring a lamb, and each one will give him the Chazei V'Shok, the chest and the thigh, which will either count as the gift for the Shlamim, or it'll count as being part of the Chabura for Korban Pesach. That way the Kohen will be Yotzei his obligation. He'll be eating a lot of meat, but he'll fulfill his obligation for the Korban Pesach, and he'll be getting the Chazei V'Shok of all the other guys who are bringing Shlamim.
Can he be a partner in multiple Korban Pesach?
But he's not. There's only one person out of this group that's bringing the Korban Pesach. Do you understand? In other words, we're each telling him, Al Tanai. You're right? Okay? So dimimonafshach ika chad lo avid pesach v'kanaf gibei, because one of them, right? The Gemara speaks out Alan's issue. Only one of them is bringing the Korban Pesach, so he'll be part of that guy's chabur, and all the other ones will be getting the chazei v'shog. So ela mishum deka mema'et ba'achila shlamim de'ilu pesach liyom v'layla ve'ilu shlamim l'shnei yomim v'layla echad. So the Gemara's answer is, there's another technical issue. Really, this solution would work with the Kohen, but there's another problem. The problem is that a Korban Pesach is only allowed to be eaten for that day and that night, and by the morning of the next day you have to burn it. A Korban Shlamim is allowed to be eaten 2 full days. And in the event that this is a Shlamim and not a Pesach, you're causing its premature demise, its premature incineration. And that you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to, what's called, you're not allowed to be maybe a korban to the Beis HaSreifa, to be burned prematurely. So that's the reason why you can't make this tonight, because the Shlomim and the Korban Pesach have different expiration times. So the Gemara says, "V'nei say Moser HaPesach, v'nei mi EDD balmum hayda isi hash nihavi Pesach, EDD tamhu nihavi hayda isi hash Shlomim, de Moser Pesach nechal liyom v'layla echad." So the Gemara says, well, I have another solution. You know that there's this concept called Mosar Pesach, which means that if someone wants to, I can designate 2 lambs for my Korban Pesach, just as in like an insurance policy. And I can say whichever lamb is left over, that'll be called Mosar Pesach. So after I bring my Korban Pesach, the leftover lamb is a Korban Shlomim. It's treated as a Korban Shlomim with one exception, that it has to be with the restrictions of the expiration time of a Korban Pesach. So therefore the Gemara says, a great chap, I have a solution. Let me set aside a lamb and I'll say this is a Shlomim, but also Shlomim designated as Mosar Pesach, that it's a leftover from a Korban Pesach. So therefore I will designate it as having the same expiration time as a regular Korban Pesach, and I'll basically say as follows. If I haven't yet been Yotzei, the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, so then this will be, I'll bring this as a Korban Pesach. And if I have already been Yotzei, my mitzvah of Korban Pesach in Nisan, so then this Korban is just a regular Shlomim, but with the qualification of being Mosar Pesach. And therefore, I'm not causing it to burn prematurely, because that is its expiration time, that I have to burn it by morning. So the Gemara says, but no, you can't do that, because v'chi Fri Jun techila lemosaros. You're not allowed to initiate for no reason an animal and call it Mosar Pesach. It's only post facto that if you have left over, then you're allowed to, then you treat it as what's called Mosar Pesach. But to initiate, even after Pesach, to say that this animal is Mosar Pesach, you can't do that, right? It's only when you have leftovers from your initial Korban Pesach, but you can't designate initially as an animal as being a leftover if there's no primary, right? So that doesn't work. So the Gemara says, "V'nitrachu v'naisi Mosar HaPesach." But the Gemara says, okay, fine, maybe you can't initiate an animal as being called Mosar Pesach. But for sure, just go on Facebook or Twitter and find someone who has a leftover lamb. In other words, you'll find someone. You'll put an ad in the paper. You'll find someone who has a leftover lamb from Nisan, who they didn't end up using, and you'll buy it from them. And that'll be Mosar Pesach. And basically, then you'll make a tanai with this animal, and you say, look, if I haven't been Yotze my Korban Pesach yet, this will be my Korban Pesach, and if not, it'll be a Shlomim that has the din of Mosar Pesach, which they'll have equal expiration times, and that should work. So the Gemara says, you're right, that would work, but there's another technical issue, which is Ela Mishum Smicha. De'ilu Pesach lo boy smicha, ve'ilu Mosar boy smicha. There's just one issue. Even if we're to use that method, there's just one other problem. A shlomim, even a Mosar Pesach shlomim, you have to do what's called smicha. You have to press down on the animal before you bring it. A Korban Pesach doesn't require smicha. If it doesn't require smicha, then it's usher to do smicha, because the Torah doesn't allow you to work an animal that's sacrificial. And by pressing down on it unnecessarily, you're working it. So therefore, you have this dilemma of, well, do I do smicha or not? If it's a shlomim, I have to do smicha. If it's a Pesach, I'm not allowed to do smicha. So that's why it's not going to work. The Gemara says, but wait a minute. Hateinach korban anoshim ha'ikal ameima. All right, that's well and good if it's a man's korban Pesach that we want to bring. But a woman, the halacha is women don't do smicha. So why can't a woman use this method, use this solution? The Gemara says, Ela mishum matanos, de'ilu Pesach matana echas, ve'ilu shlomim shnaim shein dalid. The Gemara says, okay, for a woman it would work, but there's another technical issue, and that is the placement of the blood on the altar. The placements of blood are different for a Korban Pesach from a Korban Shlomim. A Korban Pesach, there's only one place on the side of the altar that you place the blood, and you throw the blood only on one place of the altar. By a Shlomim, you have to place it on 2 opposite corners of the altar, so that's called 2, which is really 4, because it's 2, but each placement goes on either side of the corner. So that's called, so it's really on all four walls of the Mizbeach. A Shlomim blood has to be placed. So that's the reason why it's not going to work, because the blood placements are different. So the Gemara says, "My nafkamina v'hatznan kol hanitanan al mizbeach hachitzon shenosnu b'matan echas kiper." The Gemara says, but what difference does it make? In other words, even though lechatchila, there's a lechatchila dikadin that you have to place the blood according to the prescribed method, but b'di'eved, even if I just placed blood in one place where the Torah requires me to place it on four places, I'm still yotze. So what's the big deal? Just place it on one place of the Mizbeach and say that it's, I'm not sure whether it's a Shlomim or a Pesach, but either way, I'll be yotze the korban, right? So the Gemara says, Ela mishum de'ilu Pesach b'shvicha ve'ilu Shlomim b'zrika. So the Gemara says, okay, but there's still a technical issue, because the method of blood placement is also different. Not only the places on the Mizbeach where you have to place it, but the method is different in that there are different ways in order to place blood. One is called shvicha, which is where I bring the utensil containing the blood and I place it all the way up to the altar so that the bowl is touching the stones of the altar, and I gently pour it out. That's called shvicha, where the blood gently flows downwards. The other one is called zrika, where I stand at a distance from the Mizbeach and I toss it. I throw the blood so that it splashes on the side. Now, a korban pesach requires shvicha, the gentle pouring that is proximal to the stones, and a korban shlomim requires zrika, which is throwing at a distance. So that's also going to preclude me from making this kind of conditional deal. But the Gemara says, but still, my nafkamina. What difference should that make? Vaha tanya kol hanitanin bezrika shenasnan b'shvicha yatsa. But there too, that's only a lichatchila. But b'di'eved, you're always yotze. If you're supposed to do shvicha and you do zrika, or you're supposed to do zrika and you do shvicha, you're still yotze the korban. So what difference does it make? The Gemara's final answer is, Ema de kamrinan di'i avad lechatchila nami? Question mark. The Gemara says, but that only works b'di'eved. But we would never tell you lechatchila, go bring a korban using this kind of tanai, this conditional statement, which is going to necessitate you doing the placement of the blood in the wrong way. Even though b'di'eved you're yotze, even if you do the placement of the blood in the non-prescribed fashion, but lechatchila we're not going to allow you to do it, right? And so therefore that's why the Gemara says we stand by the original statement that you don't bring a Pesach Sheni in a situation where you're a mesupuk, whether you have to bring one or not. And let this act as the sort of the general rule that if a person's mesupuk, whether he has to bring Pesach Sheni or not, we don't allow him to do so, because there's no lichatchila dika way of getting around this thing of it's either a shlomim or a Pesach.
Instead of working at the lichatchila and b'di'eved problems that we have here, why can't you can't be samach umbrera? Do it the opposite way?
What do you mean, do it the opposite way?
Do it the opposite way. In other words, that you were gilui daita, that will reveal your das in terms of using brera.
Yeah, but brera only works if you did it in the prescribed fashion. Here, you don't know what the prescribed method is. Brera is where I am in control of the situation, but I'm not. Klape shmaya, I either did bring the korban pesach or I didn't. Brera is not going to help me. It's not totally in my das. Brera is something that is totally in my das that
And
I can.
you'll never find out. In other words,
I'll never find out. Only the Ribono Shalom knows, right? Okay. Let's go weiter. Mishnah. Ha'omer livno hareini shochet es ha'pesach al mi sheyalah mikem rishon liYerushalayim. So a father has a great einfall. He has a great idea. I got a bunch of kids, and I want to give them an incentive. Like, you ever want to give an incentive to your kid to come to shul?
Early.
Right? Yeah, come to shul early. So he says, look, I'm going to be in Yerushalayim for Pesach. Whoever gets into Yerushalayim first will be part of my chabura for the korban Pesach. Now, presumably, as we'll see from the language of the Gemara and the Mishnah, is that we're talking about where the kids are arriving in the evening. So the evening of the Seder, right? So the father says, whoever gets into Yerushalayim first will get to partake of the korban Pesach with me. So Kevin Sheichnas Harishon Roshu Verubo Zacha Bechelko Umezaka Es Echav Imo. So the Mishnah says that whichever son or child gets there first automatically becomes part of the chabura, and not only that, but through his entry, he's able to get all of his siblings to be part of the chabura as well. How? So as we'll see in just a moment, the father really is not being serious that he only means for one of the kids to be the part of the chabura. He's only doing this to provide incentives for them to hurry up. But he really means to include all of them. He just wants the he wants there to be a competition so that there'll be a sense of pride whoever gets there first.
You know when the pull-us line was, right?
Depends how smart your kids are. You'll have to find another incentive the next year. All right, so the Gemara now says, Shma mina yesh breira. So the Gemara in the Havamina doesn't really understand that this is all part of just a competition that the father's trying to create, right? But the Gemara's sound is mashma. It sounds like there's only one child who's going to be part of the chabura, and since the child is arriving perhaps that evening after the shechita is done, you must say yesh breira, that there's retroactivity that reveals which child, even though the father didn't know which one was going to get there first. Whichever child got there first, it's retroactively that he was the designated, the one to be. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, no. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, we're not using breira here. You can't prove that there's a din of breira, but rather, kedei lazarzan b'mitzvos ka'amar. Really, the father means to include all of his kids, but he wants them to get there quickly, so he creates this tournament in order to see which child will get there first. But really, he means to include all of his children. Dikanami tikatani umazake echavima. You have to say that because how else can the brother, the son who gets there first, through his arrival, include all of the other children? So if you tell me that the father really meant to include all of his children at the very outset, so then I understand it. But if they were never included in the first place, how then can the one child's arrival, how can that automatically make it so that the father can now include the other kids? We're going to see in the very next Mishnah that you're allowed to be added or subtracted from a chabura up until the shechita. But once the shechita takes place, you can't just add yourself to a chabura, even if everyone's willing. It's too late. So how can you tell me the other kids are going to just automatically be added with the arrival of one of the children? So the answer must be that the father really did include everyone, all of his kids, in the chabura initially, and he just did this in order to get them to come as quickly as possible to make them excited about the mitzvah. Now, Tanya Nami Hachi. The Bryce actually supports this because it shows you that a father did this in order to be mizarez, in order to get his kids to act quickly. And the Bryce says 1 year the daughters got there before the sons, and that was because they were watching the football game. So that's why they were just playing around. So the daughters, that was the year that was known as the daughters were the zrizos, they were the quick ones, and the sons were the lowlifes. So sometimes it pays to not miss the shear, or to go to Beis Yaakov, because these were good girls. Anyway, next Mishnah. La'olam nimnan alav ad sheyiyah bo kizayis l'chol echad ve'echad. So the rule that the Mishnah says is la'olam. You can always add more people to your chabura, as long as there will be a kazayas for each person. But once you get to the point where, there's not enough meat for each person to have a kazayas, then you have to close the chabura. And then it says, Nimnenu moshchenes yedem imenu ad sheyishachet. And like we just said a moment ago, you can be added to or withdraw from a chabura up until the time of shechita. Reb Shimon Omer ad sheyizarek es adam. And Reb Shimon says, no, you even have until the zrikas adam, even after the shechita. Let's take a look at the Gemara. My kamashmalan. So the Gemara's question really is difficult to understand. There's a hagaha on the side of my Gemara that says, my la'olam, that really the way the girsa is, what is this word la'olam coming to teach? That it says, la'olam nimnin alav, that you can always be added to a chabura. That word la'olam is a language of universalism, and it must be coming to add something. So what is it coming to add? What's the chiddush it's coming to try and tell me? So the Gemara says, "Hakamashmalan da'afal gav de'imni alav chabura zu chozeres v'neinu alav chabura cheres." It's coming to tell me a big chiddush, that let's say you have 5 guys that made up a chabura, and for some reason all 5 drop out, and you're left within a korban pesach that has no owner. You can get another group of guys, and they can all become part of the new chabura to take possession of this lamb. In other words, there's a shita that the Gemara says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, at least one of the original members of the chabura has to stick with this lamb, and if not, you can't use this korban pesach. So the chiddush of our Mishnah is we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. But the chiddush is that even if everyone drops out, you can still use this as a korban pesach with a whole new group of people. Next,
I'm sorry.
Yes.
in the Seder, when what's the wording that we use when we call out loud for
Kol dichvin yesei ve'yichol. Whoever's hungry, let them come and eat.
So it's kind of like the Leolam in a way.
Well, that's a famous question that they ask. How can we say Kol dichvin yesei ve'yichol if the law of Korban Pesach does not allow me to add people to my chabura after the shechita? It's a famous question that the Meforshim asks. Some actually say that the whole reason we say the Halach Ma'anya is to demonstrate that we're not having a Korban Pesach. Because if there was a Korban Pesach at our Seder, we wouldn't be able to extend this invitation. Do you understand?
So the invitation said before Korban.
Yeah.
No, it's said at night. It's said at the Seder. The Malbim says that actually the Malbim does say that originally the Kol Dichvin was when you went out into the streets. You went out into the streets on Erev Pesach while it was still daytime, and you said it. But the fact of the matter is, we don't. We say it at the Seder. Okay. Okay, so Nimnan Umoshkin Shidei Madshi Shachet that we have a machlokus between the Tanakam and Reb Shimon as how long you have to join or to drop out. So Amar Abaye machlokus limoshech the Rabbanan Savri mihiyos misem michyusa deseh Reb Shimon Savri mihavyose deseh that the only machlokus between the Chachamim and Reb Shimon is how long do you have to drop out, and it's based upon the pasuk the imyimat habayis mihiyos miseh that if there are too few people to be able to join together in one family for this sheep. So you read it as follows: the im yim'at habayis, that if there is a diminution in the household, in other words, if people drop out, how long do they have to drop out? Mihiyos miseh, and the Chachamim transpose the hay for a ches, which we do quite often, and they read it as michiyusei deseh, only as long as the seh is alive. That's when you have the ability to drop out. But if once the seh has been geshachted, so then you can't drop out anymore. And Reb Shimon says, no, don't transpose the hay for a ches, but leave it as a hay, and mehavyaso deseh, which means that you have until the seh is finished in its protocol, which means you have up until the zrika. That's the way he learns the pasuk. So that's the machlokus, is how long do I have to drop out? But when it comes to how long do I have to join a chabura, both Reb Shimon agrees that you only have until the shechita. In other words, he only takes issue as far as dropping out of the chabura. But to join a chabura, you only have until the shechita. He agrees to that. Why? Because that's based on a different pasuk. The pasuk says that b'michsas nefashos, with the head counting of souls, tachosu. You shall tachosu. We had explained before is kos means to slaughter. So you have, as far as joining a chabura, you only have until the shechita, according to everybody. Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa supports this. Nimdanu moshchen es yedem mimenu ad sheyishachet, that you're allowed to join and drop out of a chabura up until the slaughter. And Reb Shimon Omer nimdan ad sheyishachet umoshchen ad sheyizarik adam. There, Reb Shimon is quoted explicitly as saying, I agree as far as joining a chabura, you only have until the shechita, but as far as dropping out of a chabura, you have until the zrika. Next mission. Hamimane imo acher bechelko rishoyin b'nei chabura litan lo eshalo v'hu ochel mishalo v'hen ochel mishalahem. Very interesting halacha as far as social etiquette is concerned, and we'll see a very interesting, like this is almost like a human ethical issue, right? As far as the joining, being part of a chabura, you have 5 guys that are part of a chabura. Yankel, one of the guys of the 5, says, you know what? I got a guy, Moshe, he's my buddy. He doesn't have a place to go, so I'll have him join my chabura. The other guys in the chabura can say, hey, we bargained for 5 portions in this Korban Pesach. You want to bring a 6th guy in? You're not going to diminish my portion. You'll take, here, we'll cut up this animal into 5 parts. You take your 5th, and you can share with your friend Moshe. Go ahead, go wherever you want, but get out of here. You're not going to have him sit down at the table with us and have him eat into our portions. Okay, they have a right to do that.
What's the issue with this if everybody has kazayas?
The issue is we didn't plan for this contingency. You didn't consult with us. This is
They're hungry.
In other words, that's okay.
It's for sure okay for Yankel to give Moshe a portion of his, but what Yankel is trying to do, he's trying to divide it into 6 parts instead of 5. And they say, listen, that's not what we bargained. We arranged, every guy was going to pay $50, and we're all going to get a 5th of this lamb. You want us to cut down on our portions?
Let's be a good guy at their expense.
Yeah, you want to be a good guy at our, exactly. You want to be a good guy at our expense. You didn't ask us Rishus to do that, so you want to take your portion and share it with Moshe? Go right ahead. Instead of you having a fifth, you'll have a tenth. But that's fine. But don't expect us to give up of our chelik. You're right. They're yotzi with just the kazais, but we wanted to eat a nice piece of meat. Anyway, now they can also do a chesed. They can't, but they also have the prerogative of turning him down and saying, "You take your fifth and get out of here."
What if they don't want to sit with this other guy?
That's right. Well, you're going to see in just a second. Part of this has to do with inviting an uninvited guest, as far as just not wanting to sit with someone that they're not familiar with, and that's also going to be an issue. But right now, it seems like Rashi points out in the Mishnah, this Mishnah is of the opinion that we're not obligated to sit at the same table and eat the Korban Pesach together. If we want to put you in the other room, we have a right to tell you, go to the other room. The Gemara now says, Ibayalahu b'nei chabura sheha yadav shel echad mehen yafos, mahu shemer lo tul chelkecha v'tzei. Now the Gemara is using euphemistic language, but basically when it says that yadav shel echad mehen yafos, which means his hands are much prettier, really what it means is he's a grubber. The guy is a glutton. And you ever sit down with a guy when you have, like in a Chinese restaurant, you order a poo-poo platter, right? So there's like 4 wings for 4 guys, and one guy's the grubber. He eats 2 out of the 4, right? He's a glutton, right? He's got a hearty appetite. So the question is, can we tell a guy who's part of our chabura, hey, stop eating so fast. You're outpacing everyone in the group. Can we tell him, you finished your portion, go eat in the other room and get out of here? Or are we obligated to let him continue eating into our portions? So mi amrinan matzi amrlahu hakabilton odilma matzu lemarmalei ki kablina letikune zvicha adaita deachal tveminon lo kablinach. The two sides of the coin are like this. Big Joe says, hey, you guys knew I had a big appetite. Look at my boich, right? You know I was going to eat a lot, so why did you invite me? So does he have a right to say that? And he says, I'm not leaving. Or can they say back to him, no, Big Joe, we only invited you because we had too much meat on this lamb. Well, we invited you to have an equal portion, but not to take away our zchus of having a nice portion of the Korban Pesach. We invited you to be the 5th guy, to have a 5th, not to take away and eat into our portions as well. So Tashma, Hamemana acherim imo al chelko rishon b'nei I'm sorry. Hamemana acherim imo al chelko rishoyin b'nei chabur litin lo eshelo v'hu ochel eshelo v'en ochel eshelo. So what did our Mishnah say? That if one of the guys, Yankel, invites his friend Moshe without consulting the other members of the chabura, they can say to him, you take your 5th and do with it whatever you want, and we don't have to share our portion with another guy. So my time, what's the reason? Lav mishum dahavi leiki yadayim shel echad mehen yafos. V'yisal gadaitich yadav yafos matzi amarlu kabilton nihavi haiki yada yafos. So the Gemara says, you see from here, this is no different in the Gemara's assumption from a guy who's a glutton. Just like a guy who's a glutton, we have a right to tell him to get out of here because you've already eaten your portion. So too we have a right to say to a guy who wants to bring a 6th guy as part of the chabura, no, you had no right. You had no right to go into our portions. And if you're going to argue that that Big Joe could always say, hey, you guys knew that I could always eat more, so you have to accept me. Why can't this guy say the same thing? That, hey, you guys knew that I could always bring a friend, so you have to accept him. So the Gemara says, no. Amri lo deo shiny. Dinami travayo kechad mibnei chabura hu da'ach limatzi amri le lo nichalan inish nuchra gabon. This is going back to what Shlomi was suggesting. He says, the Gemara says, no. I could argue that the reason why the Mishnah says that we have a right to reject the 6th guy from joining our chabura is not just because he's going to eat more, right? That's not the issue. Really, if there was no other new 6th guy, maybe Big Joe does have a right to eat more than the other guys because he's got a heartier appetite. But when it comes to adding another person, even if Yankel and Moshe will only end up eating a 5th between the two of them, the other guys still have a right to reject the 6th guy. Why? Because they could say, we had set up for an intimate evening of 5 around the table, and we know each other, we have things we want to discuss. We never bargained for this 6th guy to come to the chabura. So that's why, in other words, it's what you were suggesting, Shlomi. It's not just the issue of taking away part of our Korban Pesach, but it's also that we have a right to say who we wish to dine with. And you can't, on your own, without consulting with the rest of the members of the dinner party, say you want to bring an uninvited guest. That's not derech eretz. And boy, this is such a powerful Gemara. You have so many different applications. So the Gemara now says Tashma. So again, we don't have a resolution about the case of Big Joe when he wants to eat more than his portion. So Tashma, Hashamish sha'achal kazayas basar b'tzara tanur im hayipikeach mimali kreisu mimenu and im ratzu b'nei chabur lasas toveimo boin v'yoshva b'tzido va'ochel in divi Rabbi Yehuda. Now, we had seen this Gemara before. It's a Mishnah that you know that the Korban Pesach is only allowed to be eaten in one place. You can't go from place to place. Once you've started eating the Korban Pesach in place A, you can't now pick up your stuff and go to place B to continue eating. So the case is as follows. We have a chabur of 5 guys, and we had assigned Yankel to be in charge of the barbecue, right? Yankel is going to be the guy who's in charge of roasting the animal. And all of a sudden, Yankel is standing by the barbecue and roasting the Korban Pesach. Everything's going great. And he thinks it's ready, but he's not sure. So he says, let me taste it. So he takes a bite, like it takes a little cut out of it to taste it. And he says, oh my goodness, I just realized that I've started eating the Korban Pesach and I'm not allowed to go anywhere else. So the Mishnah had said he has to continue eating by the oven. He can't now go with the rest of the chabur and sit down and dine with them. He's got to finish eating there, and he can eat as much as he wants, but he can only eat it there. If the guys in the chabura want to be nice guys, they can join him by the barbecue and eat with him there. But they're not obligated to. So the Gemara says, Ratzu in lo, Ratzu lo. You see that it's only if they want to be nice guys that they can go and join him, but if they don't want to, they don't have to. Va'amai, ne'malahu ha'kabilton. Why can't the guy, Yankel, who's doing the barbecue, say to them, look, when we signed up together, you accepted me unconditionally, no matter what. We have to stick together as a chabura. So just like the shamish can't say to them, no matter what, we have to stick together, so too Big Joe can't say to the guys, no matter what, we have to stick together, you got to let me continue eating. The Gemara says, no. Shiny hasam damri lake hi kablinach adaita de nitrechach, come on. Lemitrach lan ledidach lo kablinach. So the Gemara says, no. That's different over there, because they could always say to the guy, look, we signed on with you so that, because the understanding was that an individual would have to comply and conform to the needs of the group, but that the group should have to conform to the needs of the individual that we never signed on to, and therefore it's different. So the Gemara wants to argue similarly, it's not comparable, the Gemara wants to say, because Big Joe could say to them, I'm not being matriach, you guys, I'm not making you schlep to a place where I want to be. I just want to eat more than everyone else because I have a bigger appetite. What's the big deal? I'm not being matriach you. I'm not burdening you at all by making you exert yourselves unnecessarily. So that's why you can't really prove from one case to the other. The Gemara, yeah.
Is there not any concept of gzela if everyone pays a fifth in and some guy eats more than his fifth share?
Right, so that's what the Gemara is really essentially deliberating, because really part of this question is a Dinei Mamonis question. But it's not, the truth of the matter is that that's part of the question. Maybe the guy Big Joe is going to argue, when we all put in our $50, it was to share in total a $250 animal. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to eat the same amount. Look, there's a 90-pound weakling and a Big Joe's 300 pounds. So what were you guys expecting? You know that I have a big appetite. I'm a big guy. I'm a hungry man, right? Was that one of those commercials? What was it called? Hungry Man with Campbell soup, whatever. I'm trying to remember what that commercial. Right. Hungry Jack or something. I forgot what the commercial was. Do you remember those commercials?
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah. So anyway, so the Gemara says Tashma. So Tashma. B'nei chabura shahaya yadav shel echad mehen yafos rishoyin lomar tul chelkecha v'tzei. So let's look at this brisa. This brisa is much more explicit. The brisa says that if there was a group of a chabura and one of the guys was hungrier than the other ones, they have a right to say to him, and this is quite explicit. They have a right to say to him, "Look, take your fifth and get out of here. We don't want to share with you our. You're not allowed to eat into our portion." V'lo od, and then it goes even further. Furthermore, says the brisa. Elafilu chamisha va'asu sibolos, rishoyin lomer lo tu chelkecha v'tzei. Then even when we're not dealing with a Korban Pesach, even with we're sitting down in a restaurant in the middle of December having dinner together, We have a right, in the Chinese restaurant with the poo-poo platter, we have a right to tell the guy who wants to take more than his portion, sorry, there's 4 portions in this poo-poo platter, you take a quarter and leave, you can't take more than you're entitled to. Basically, what the Bryce is telling you is that it's an ethical issue, not even applying to sacrificial law. And that's what the Gemara speaks out, Shema Mina. So first of all, you see from here that Big Joe can't say I'm entitled to as much as I want. So my velo od, why does the Bryce have to tell me furthermore? So the Gemara explains, Lo mi baya kamer. Not only this, but even this. Lo mi baya pesach damatzi amrle ki kablinach letikune zvicha el afilu sibolos nami ditzav sabalma hu rishayin lomer lo tul chelkacha v'tzei. Don't think that this is only a law limited to sacrificial food, where the people can say, you're denying us our privilege of eating kudshim, of eating sacrificial meat. But even when we're not dealing with holy meat, where you don't have that argument, there's an ethical issue that a person or an etiquette issue, I should say, that the people that are around the dinner table can tell a guy, stop grubbing. You can't take more than what you're entitled to, no matter how big you are. And that's, by the way, it is a big chiddush, because you could argue that, listen, we know Big Joe has a big appetite. He's bigger. He's twice the size of half the guys in this room, so he should be entitled to eat more. The chiddush is no, he's not entitled to. Right? So we have to remember that, Mark, the next time we do a siyum, when they bring out the tray of chicken, just because a guy is a big eater doesn't mean he has automatically a right to take the second piece of chicken. He's got to consult with everyone on the table and say, would you like this? Would you like this? Would you? No, please, you take. Oh, no one wants it? Okay, I'll take it.
Do they have to pay equal? Let's he's a big eater. Can say you pay twice as much as everybody else?
Perhaps if he makes arrangements in advance to have, he says, you know what? I'm a big eater, so instead of splitting the bill 5 ways, let's split the bill 6 ways, and I'll pay two out of the 6. It could be that he has a right to do that, but he's got to make the arrangement in advance. He can't. They have to agree. But they have to agree to it.
Airlines went through this with big people on seats.
Yeah.
10 years, 1 15 years.
Right.
Buy 2 seats.
Right. Okay. So Ika da Amri. So there are others who learn that Haloi Bayalan, Elahachi Hudi Bayalan. So really, some learned that this wasn't even a question. It was clear that Big Joe was not entitled to more than his 5th portion, but rather the question was like this: B'nei Chabur Rishoyin Lechalek or Einen Rishoyin Lechalek. Really, it was a more fundamental question. Can the members of the Chabura voluntarily split up, or tell a guy get out of here because we don't want to eat with you anymore, or are they obligated to dine together at the same table? So Tashma B'nei Chabur Shoyi Yadav Shalechet Mehen Yafos Rishoyin Lamer Lo Tul Chalkecha V'tzei Yadav Yafos in. So the Gemara says we can adduce it from this brisa. This brisa says that only if there's a guy who's being obnoxious and eating more than his portion are we allowed to kick him out and say, go eat by yourself. But if no one's being obnoxious and it's just that we don't like each other anymore for whatever reason, or it's more convenient for us to eat separately, halachically we're not just allowed to willy-nilly just decide to part ways. We have to continue eating at the same table and eat with derech eretz, and we should all get along. Okay. Rav Papa Rav Huna Bereder Rav Yeshua Arivu Rifta Bahadi Hadadi. So here's an interesting story. Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, were once breaking bread with each other. Now remember, you got to know, from the Gemara in Bava Metzia, we know that Rav Papa was a corpulent, huge guy. The Gemara says he was so big, you could pass an ox underneath his belly. So he was a groisa mensch. And the Gemara says that's a sign of good health, right? And so they were breaking bread together. Perhaps Rav Huna was a bit of a healthier guy. He was perhaps a little bit slimmer. And Ada Achel Rav Huna Bereder Rav Yeshua Chada Achel Rav Papa Arba. Rav Huna only ate 1 piece, and Rav Papa had already eaten 4 pieces. So Amar Lei Plagli. So Rav Huna says to him, hey, Rav Papa, this is not working out well. I think you and I should split the meal and part ways. So Amar Lei Kabilton. So Rav Papa says, what are you talking about? You know I'm a big guy. You accepted to share the meal with me, and you knew that I was a big guy. So Eisve Kolhani Tiyufta Vishani Kiddushanina. So first, Rav Huna challenges him with all of the brises that we started with to try to prove that a guy can't say, you knew that I was Big Joe, so you got to accept me. And Rav Papa gave him all the terutzim that we just gave. Eisve B'nei Chabura Amalei Hasam Da'amri Leiki Kablinach L'Tikun Ezvicha. And then he asked him the question, you see there's a Beferish Brisa that by the Korban Pesach, Big Joe can't say I'm entitled. And Rav Papa said that's a special case by Kutchim, but it's got nothing to do with a regular meal. And then Eisve Siboles, and Polagle. So then Rav Huna demonstrated that the Brisa even says by having a regular dinner party, we can tell the guy to get out of here, right? We can tell him just take your portion and leave. And when Rav Papa heard that, he had no response, and basically he agreed to split the meal. So then Azal Irev Bahari Ravina. Another time, or perhaps later on, Rav Huna decided that he would share his meal with Ravina. So, and he figured, okay, Rav Papa was a big guy, but how bad can Ravina be? So, the Achla Rav Huna bereder Rav Yeshua Chada Achla Ravina Tamanya. So, Ravina had even a more voracious appetite than Rav Papa. He says, by the time Rav Huna was finished eating one, Ravina already finished eating 8 portions. So, he's a slow eater. So, Amar Meya Papi Velo Chada Ravina. He says, better I have 100 Rav Papas and not one Ravina. So, I don't know, you do the math, but I'm saying, it's a funny story though. The lesson is, of course, choose your eating partners carefully. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. So the Brisa now says, Hamimane acherim imo al pischo ve'al chagigaso mo shebiyado chulin. The Brisa says something very difficult to understand, which says basically that if you invite someone to join your chabura for the Korban Pesach, and you say, okay, $50. You want to join $50, or a Korban Chagiga. And he gives you the $50, so he becomes a partner in the Korban Pesach, and the money that you collect from him is chul, and it can be used for whatever you want. It doesn't retain a kachim status. That's a little bit strange. Why? Because the guy had already segregated money for the Korban Pesach, so the money is holy, and the Korban Pesach was already designated as a Korban Pesach, so the Korban Pesach is holy. Normally, in order for kachim money to lose its kachim status to go to chulin, it has to transfer on something that's chulin, so the kedusha goes from the money onto the animal. But if the animal is already kadosh, so how does the kedusha leave the money and become chulin? So that's what the Gemara is going to ask in just a moment. V'hamocher olasu shlamav lo asav lo klum umos kol shehein yiplu l'nedava. And then Brisa says another bizarre statement. It says that if a person sells a carbon ola or a carbon shlama, meaning that it had already been designated for one person, and he says, here, I'll sell it to you, which you're not allowed to do. Once it's been designated for Reuven, you can't sell it to Shimon. And Shimon says, okay, fine, I'll buy it. He gives him $50. So the halacha is, the sale is null and void. It's an invalid sale, but the money still has to go to the Beis HaMikdash and goes into one of the pushkas in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara now says, that doesn't make any sense. If the sale is null and void, so why should the money should still be chulin? Why do we force him to put the money in the pushka? So the Gemara says,